Hello friends. In this video, we'll try to understand tea and understand the key elements that tea consists of, and by understanding these elements, we can understand how to manipulate them in order to make the best cup of tea out of pretty much any tea that is in front of us. So let's get to it. So the three key elements of tea are caffeine, L-theanine, and catechins. Caffeine is the element responsible for giving us energy, and it has a bitter taste. This bitter taste is not always undesirable because it gives a texture to tea, and in good teas this bitter taste can turn into huigan, what Chinese call huigan. Can be translated as return sweetness, is when the initial bitterness after the sip comes back as the sweet sensation in your mouth. And the second element is L-theanine. L-theanine gives us a calm energy. It is responsible for reducing stress, for promoting good effects on our nervous system, and L-theanine has a sweet taste, and it has a taste of umami, and it's an amino acid. And the third element in tea is catechins. Catechins is a polyphenol that is responsible for astringent taste. It's an antioxidant, and it is very beneficial to health, and it has this astringency, which is also not an undesirable sensation, because it also gives tea texture and body. So none of these three elements are undesirable elements. All of them, you want all of them to be present in your tea, but in balance. You don't want one overpowering the other. You don't want the tea to be overly bitter, or you don't want the tea to be over astringent, just as well as you don't want it to be bland and without taste. So you want all three elements to work in harmony with each other. And further, we're gonna see what are the tools to control these elements. So one of the tools to control all these parameters is water temperature. For example, L-theanine is best extracted when the water temperature is around 175 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 80 degrees Celsius. So if you want to extract L-theanine primarily, then you want to keep your water at about this temperature. But if you want to extract more of caffeine or more catechins, then you need to raise the temperature of water. So catechins and caffeine are extracted best with the boiling water. So by manipulating the temperature of the water, you can manipulate which elements you want to give preference to. Another tool that we have at our disposal is brewing time. L-theanine is extracted faster than other elements. If you're brewing your tea Western method, within 3 minutes, pretty much all of the L-theanine gets extracted out of your brew. But caffeine is extracting slower. You need about 5 to 6 minutes to extract about 80% of caffeine stored in your tea. And catechins takes the longer to extract. Catechins can go on extracting for a really prolonged period of time. So the longer you brew your tea, the more catechins leak into the water. So you want to be careful not to overbrew your tea, because if you're brewing your tea, if you're leaving tea brewing for like a long period of time, then it's gonna get overly astringent, and it's not gonna be a pleasant brew. And the third element that we have at our disposal, the third tool, is leaf to water ratio. It's pretty straightforward. The higher the ratio, meaning the more tea leaves you put to the same amount of water, the more intense your brew will be. So it's like a volume dial. If you want your brew to be more gentle, you use the lower tea to water ratio. You use lesser tea for more water. If you want to intensify your brew, then the ratio, leaf to water ratio, should be higher. So you put more tea leaves per the same amount of water. So now that we have these three tools to our disposal and understand the three key elements that tea consists of, we have to understand how different teas work. So there are 6 types of tea, and each type of tea differs from the other by the level of oxidation. It also differs by the processing techniques, but this comes secondary. The most important part is the level of oxidation of each type. So let's look at them in the order of the more oxidation. So let's start with the green tea. Green tea is the least oxidized, the non-oxidized type of tea. When producers, they collect the tea leaves, they subject it to quick roasting, or in case of most Japanese teas, steaming, and the high temperature that they subject the leaves to halts the oxidation. So enzymes in tea stop working, and that preserves the fresh qualities of tea leaves. So the less oxidized tea leaves, the more they have catechins as well as L-theanine. So in green teas, you have lots of L-theanine that is responsible for sweetness and umami, but you also have lots of catechins that are responsible for astringency, and often you have plenty of caffeine that is responsible for bitterness. So with the green tea, you have to be really careful brewing it not to make it too bitter. So with the green tea, we recommend using the lower temperature at around 175 degrees, shorter brewing time. If you're brewing it Western method, Western style, then no longer than about 3 minutes. And if you are brewing it Gong Fu style, then we recommend making short steepings. Then goes white tea. White tea is the least processed type of tea. So when farmers collect these tea leaves, they let them wither, and they let them dry out. So as tea dries out, the moisture leaves the tea leaves, and oxidation in these tea leaves slows down. But because white teas, they don't go through roasting, they're not subjected to high temperatures, as white tea ages, the oxidation and just keeps going on a very slow level. The enzymes, they keep on working. So younger white teas, they can be a little bit they have a little fresher taste. They may have a little bit more catechins, and aged white teas, the teas in them get more rounded. And we have to understand how catechins work. Forgot to mention this one important thing. Catechins, as the oxidation happens in tea leaves, transforms into other elements. So from polyphenols, they turn into flavonoids. So catechin with time turns into theaflavin and thearabigin, and then it turns into theabrownin in puer teas. So catechins is the most astringent of these three, and of these four, and as tea gets more oxidized, this sharpness and astringency turns into less astringent, more rounded taste. But these elements, they give tea the body, and same happens to L-theanine. It also turns into other elements, and it turns into theaflavins and glutamic acid. So as we go on, after white tea follows yellow tea. Yellow tea is very similar to green tea. However, yellow tea goes through this one very important step, is a controlled oxidation, microoxidation, that is called in Chinese manhuang, yellow of tea leaves. And this is where on the surface the oxidation of this tea stops, but inside there goes micro oxidation that turns the sharpness of green tea into sweetness and roundness of yellow tea. So yellow tea can withstand slightly higher temperature and longer steeping times. And after yellow tea follows oolong tea. Oolong tea is a large category of tea that ranges from low oxidation, very similar to green tea, to deep oxidized, very similar to black teas, or what in Asia is called red teas. So oolongs is a broad category, and there are different teas, and you have to approach them individually. It is easy to understand whether oolong is lightly oxidized or deeply oxidized by looking at the color of tea leaves. So if tea leaves are more green, then it's a lower oxidized tea. And if the tea leaves are darker, then it's a deeper oxidized tea. So judging by that, you can figure out what temperature and what temperature you want to subject it to, and for how long you want to steep it. With lighter oxidized oolongs, we recommend using a temperature of around 195 degrees, and with the deeper oxidized oolongs, you can use higher temperature of like 205 degrees or boiling water. In China, most farmers brew oolong teas at boiling water. Now we come to what we call black teas, and what in Asia is called red tea. In China, it's called Hongcha. So black tea is a fully oxidized tea, and in this tea, catechins are already transformed into thearabigins. So you can give black tea longer steeping time and subject it to higher water temperature. without being afraid that it's gonna get overly astringent. Of course, you have to brew it with caution because these flavonoids still possess astringency, but you don't have to be as cautious with this tea as with green tea, for example. And the longer you're gonna brew it, the deeper, the thicker is gonna be the body. It's gonna have, of course, some astringent qualities, but it's not gonna get overly bitter that the green tea can. And the final category of teas, the sixth category of teas, is pu'er teas and heicha. Heicha can be translated as dark tea or black tea from Chinese. So pu'er teas are post-fermented teas, and pu'er teas can be broken into two categories: raw pu'er or shen pu'er and rye pu'er, shu pu'er. Raw pu'er is produced very similarly to green tea. However, during the shaching process, during the process that stops oxidation, it is subjected to slightly lower temperature. So the oxidation in shen pu'er is slowed down but not halted, and with time, as pu'er tea is aging, enzymes keep on working and the tea keeps on transforming. So young raw pu'er initially can be quite bitter when you brew it, but as raw pu'er ages, after many years, the taste gets more rounded, and catechins turn into flavonoids, and L-theanine is turning into glutamic acid, and the tea gets sweeter and more rounded. But when you're brewing young shen pu'er, you have to be careful. You may want to lower the water temperature, and you don't want to overbrew it. You want to subject it to shorter steeping times. In shu pu'er, shu pu'er undergoes a stage called wo dui. It's a wet piling, where it goes through microbiotic fermentation, and during this stage it gets fully oxidized, and it loses pretty much all the catechins that turn into theobromines, and the tea doesn't possess anymore the sharper astringent qualities. So with shu pu'er, you can really subject it to boiling water, and you can brew it for long times, and as a result you will get a thick brew, but it will not be astringent or overly bitter. It will be a very potent rounded brew. So now you see how by manipulating these three factors, brewing times, water temperature, and tea to water ratio, and by understanding tea and the process that tea goes through, how you can manipulate your brew, and how you can achieve better results with pretty much any tea that you're brewing. Japanese green teas often consist of much smaller particles. It's like broken leaves. And in broken leaves, the surface that comes into play with water of each leaf is much higher than in a whole intact leaf that is usually found in quality Chinese teas. So when there is more surface that comes into play with water, then the substance of the tea gets released much faster. So if you look at the tea leaves, you examine them before brewing, and you see that the leaves, for one or another reason, are broken. The tea consists of smaller particles. You want to take it into consideration and give it a shorter steeping time. And same can be applied to tea bags if you're brewing tea with tea bags, because tea bags are usually filled with what we call tea dust. It's small particles. There are no intact whole leaves. So these small particles, wherever substance they have, and they usually don't have L-theanine at all, they usually have just contain lots of caffeine and catechins, it just gets soaked in the water really fast. So when you're brewing tea with tea bags, we don't recommend brewing it for longer than like half a minute. So only like shorter steeping is what you need when brewing tea bag tea. And another thing that I think is important to mention is the safety measure when brewing Gong Fu style. I recommend when brewing an unfamiliar tea to start with safer parameters. Let's say you're brewing an unfamiliar tea, you want to start with slightly lower water temperature, and you want to start with shorter steepings, because after the first brew you can determine whether your tea has plenty of body, plenty of taste, or if it needs a little bit more push. And in this case you can increase the temperature or you can increase the steeping time, and it is easy to adjust going forward. However, if you will overbrew your tea from the get-go, it is really hard to go back and to fix this mistake. So it's easier to compensate by raising the water temperature and by raising the steeping time, but it is much harder to go back and fix the mistake that you already made if the tea is overbrewed. Not impossible, but much harder. So keep it in mind, and when brewing an unfamiliar tea, start safe. I hope that this video was helpful. If you're interested to learn a little bit more on this subject, look in the description and look into the first comment. We'll have a link to our blog post on this subject, and also a link to sign up to our newsletter to stay in the know. You will get notified about new teas and about new articles on tea and tea culture. We hope you like this video. Till next time. Cheers.